One, two, three. We are going to wait a few more minutes. You guys have some, I'm supposed to use this, but I don't know if you hear my voice there any different. Is it working? Because I think it's only for the live stream, maybe. No, it works? Okay, okay. Yeah. So it's going to be easier that way. Wonderful. Should we get started or wait another minute, maybe? Good. Well, we are extremely fortunate to have Enrico Pace visiting us. Most of you were here yesterday, so maybe there is no need for an introduction today, but he is obviously our guest for the Green Honors Chair at TCU, and he has performed around the world with some of the greatest musicians. And as I said yesterday, what makes him truly a unique musician for me is his ability to go beyond, not only beyond the notes, but also to intend music as something very, very vast and not limited just to the piano repertoire. So along with his studies in compositions and conducting, I know that he has been collecting several scores since he was a teenager, when he was a participant, I think, in Moscow in the Tchaikovsky competition.
Oh, yes, already there, yeah. I came back like with 1.5 meters of scores.
Yes, so he's used to even buying suitcases on the spot and fill them with books, and he is also a great scholar in that sense, because you will notice even in the recital something very peculiar in the first movement of the Waldstein Sonata. He's not making up notes, but he's playing some things that are in the autograph. And in any case, it's a great honor to have him here. And we could proceed to this question and answer. If you have prepared or are thinking of asking some questions, please go ahead. And I probably should share the microphone. Yes, that would be better. So who would like to start? Okay, here we go.
Hello, thanks for being here. I had one question that I wrote down because I knew I'd forget it if I don't do such things. One question I had was sort of how to predict repertoire trends, because it seems like what sort of standard rep and 5 years ago is not standard rep today. Sometimes, like for example, like a few years ago I played Janacek, and maybe like 10 years ago that wouldn't have been considered. Like now it's becoming more mainstream. So how do you sort of like predict what the audiences will want to hear without also going like too far astray into very unusual things?
I think basically you have to make up your mind in what you want to say. You cannot know what an audience of maybe 200, 500, 1,000 people want to hear. And I think there is also an aspect where, you should not, in fact, please the desires of the audience in terms of repertoire. Of course, please in terms of beauty and of expression, yes. But I think the repertoire is very personal, and you should follow your own way and choice, and also how to put together a program. So to feel what are the moments in the performance, the energies that are building up and eventually receding. And I think you can make up your own structure. It is true that there are periods when some pieces are somehow played a lot. I don't know how this works, actually. I have no idea whether it's something that happens by chance or somebody hears something and then it becomes fashionable. But I don't think you should be affected from that as a player. I think you should just do what you like and what your own path is bringing you to. Because we all have different tastes and a different way of approaching music and piano playing throughout the age and throughout our development. So I think it's essential just to follow your own thing. Pleasure.
I had a question also about repertoire. Kind of a twofold question. So, what is it that? How do you go about deciding what repertoire you will put together for your concerts, and how also do you maintain such a large range of?
Well, it depends. I'm also playing a lot of chamber music. So in chamber music, sometimes it's a shared choice. Sometimes it's my partner who's actually choosing. So that, and then maybe we talk about and we try to make a structured program. But as far as I was saying before, as far as I'm concerned, there are periods when I feel most attracted to some music, some period in history of music, and then I try to delve into that period and to do what I feel most in that period. So nowadays we tend to do more like, okay, all Beethoven, all Liszt, all Schumann, all Brahms, this kind of really intellectual concert repertoire. But I think there is also a need, and in this case you must also a little bit go towards the public, because some things, if you play, I have played the Harmonie Poétique et Religieuse by Liszt, for instance, some years ago. And it was a period I really wanted to do that. And but I felt that maybe for the public, just 1 hour 20, 1 hour 25 of the same kind of idea towards music and towards a word by Liszt, maybe for the public is a bit too much. So, it's always a question of balancing your choices, what you want to do, and then the pandemic struck, and then it was the end of the Harmonie Poétique et Religieuse. We were all very worried. But anyway, I think, as I said before, just to follow your inner will to do something special.
My question for you, what are some of your strategies with managing quite a bit of repertoire, or preparing for a big competition like the Cliburn with so much repertoire?
Well, of course, this is a long-run project. So if you're preparing for such a big competition with a lot of rounds and with a concerto in the end and chamber music and and pre-selections and videos, it really takes years. Maybe you should prepare like 2 years in advance and then just pile up the pieces. Of course, it's not something you can do in a short time. But anyway, what I advise for young players usually is to have a core. Of course, sometimes you need to play etudes, you need to play Bach, preludes and fugues, you need to be aware and able to play classical, so-called classical styles like Haydn, Mozart, or Beethoven. So, you must have your strongholds, your war pieces on those things. A study, you cannot improvise. This you must do like every day for years. And then it will come like you don't have to think about. These things you have to train as a sportsman. Because you have maybe 15 minutes, you come, and of course you're nervous, and you have to do it, and it must be almost automatic. It's not that you have the time to play first Chopin etude or second etude. There is no time to think. It's just it should happen, and this of course comes also to a little bit this kind of Zen preparation. So when you practice, you should get to a level where you're just above. all the problems. I'm talking specifically about etudes. So really train for it. Train means really every morning practicing this piece and then playing it when you know it, and then playing a bit faster, and then going back to slower speed, but really focus on this. And then for the rest of the repertoire, of course, you have to be ready much in advance. This is usually and then rehearse performing this repertoire in the order of what you would be playing at the competition. That is also very important. So the order, not just, okay, I know how to play this, I know how to play that, but of course sometimes the order affects as well, because maybe you play one sonata and then at the end you play the etude, but you're tired. And so you have to know what you have to do in case you're tired. So it's really, sportsmen, now they have like a coach, really telling them what to eat, how to sleep, how to, exercise, how to train. We don't have, but we have a lot of literature. We have a lot of possibilities of learning. So I think this is really, you have, of course, to treat well your body, to treat well your mind, and not to be tired, of course, and not to over-practice just before the competition. I mean, these are also essential things. But to be ready much in advance. And of course, if you have a large and big project, is that you should have smaller projects on the way to it. So smaller competitions where you can rehearse the pieces, because to play the pieces in concert is something, but to play when you know that the jury is listening and judging and putting marks is something else. So that also is important. So it's a path that takes time, and you have to see it long in advance, I think.
I have a question, because you recorded all the Beethoven sonatas, violin sonatas, and I would like to know if you have any editorial preferences, if you have any concrete additions that you were working during this recording.
Sorry, I didn't hear. If you have any what?
Editions, yes.
Okay, yeah. Usually when there is a recording involved, what I try to do is to have all the editions. So to look into the old ones, starting from the first complete edition, at the time complete, maybe then they discovered some other things, was by Liszt, by Beethoven. So one can still find, and unfortunately there is not a lot online, there is something on the Petrucci library, but not a lot. You can find the editing of Liszt of all the sonatas and trios and cello sonatas, violin sonatas, and sometimes it's very interesting because it differs from the manuscripts. And this, with Beethoven especially, sometimes he was quite chaotic in the way he was doing things. He was not very organized. He was a genius, of course, but not organized. So many times we see in these manuscripts that there are things that don't make sense, as far as I can judge. And then you see maybe Liszt's edition, and you see that there are different things, sometimes different notes, sometimes different ties to the notes, sometimes different, with Beethoven it's always very difficult. Okay, he puts a forte piano, or he puts a piano subito after a forte, and sometimes it's not clear where exactly. Is this on the second note, or is this on the first note of the bar? And this drives you crazy because within the same movement, it's different. And then you have to think, okay, was that by chance? Was that the first edition that because they didn't have room to write the piano in that spot, put it a little bit later? And these are all questions that are open, and then by studying all the editions throughout the history and the modern ones that have looked at all the sources, you can actually make up your mind, but not have a definitive answer like, this is the truth. This I could never do. But it's interesting that sometimes with this repertoire, like the cello sonatas or violin sonatas or even trios and piano concerti by Beethoven, at the time they did four-hands editions for home use. Four-hands was the radio of the house at the time. So maybe you had in the house 2 young girls or 2 young boys, or you had friends, and you would come in the evening, and then the radio was playing four-hands. And they would play everything. And from this course that are from that period, sometimes you can discover some notes that are the right ones, or some phrasings that were neglected we could say, in the first edition, or even in the autograph sometimes, Beethoven was not able to know, do I want this note or do I want this style? And then he was scratching, and to the point that he had to write the name of the notes. So E, G, D, because it was not possible to read it. At the time, they were writing with ink, and then they were scraping the ink. So after a while, there is a hole in the paper, so you cannot write anymore. But anyway, to come back to the question, I did look through like all the major editions, Wiener Rotex, Bärenreiter, Henry, and all the past ones like Peters, or like the ones that are, and even more exotic ones, as I said, the first edition by Liszt or others, and then revisions by important musicians. And then you see that historically, the way of reading the score changes a lot. For instance, Liszt would recommend to his pupils to use Bülow, Hans von Bülow's edition by Beethoven solo piano sonatas. Now, this edition is the opposite of what we would regard as a Urtext.
Yes.
Because he suggests to change things, to put octaves, to add things. I mean, he's really taking part in the composition, but in a very clever way. So I always say, okay, look at that. You don't have to do the same things he did, but understand why he's doing that. And then, of course, there are the Schenker analysis, and now this is more on the solo sonatas, there is so much, especially on Beethoven, that, is a never-ending story. And of course, then you have to at least consult. Now we're lucky that on the Beethoven House site in Bonn, you can see everything digitally. So all the manuscripts, even sometimes first editions, and this is of course very interesting because you can discover even by the way it's written. And what I really love of these manuscripts is that nothing is square. When something is printed, all the lines are square. So it gives you a different idea. So we have always this idea of architecture and classical beauty, but in fact it was much more effort and human, effort to write these things, and also gesture. You can see by the way they are written if there is a haste or if he changed his mind halfway through. And so it's essential to look at the manuscripts, I think, when you can have them, of course.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I wanted to piggyback off of two other questions about repertoire and the massive amounts of repertoire that some pianists have and how they're maintaining it. So a hypothetical situation is next month you have 3 or 4 different piano concertos that you have to play, and also 2 different programs for solo recitals. How do you keep it all up?
I think you should ask Yuja Wang. Because you see her calendar is just amazing. I don't know how this is possible, humanly, because she's such an incredible talent and she can play these things. I was never able to do such a thing, like 3, 4 concertos and 2 programs at the same time. But I think some people can do it, or also Marc-Andrea Melen. These people with incredible, heads. And for me, it's more about maybe 1 concerto, 1 recital, and several chamber music programs. And of course, it's already challenging because many times you don't have enough time between the 2. And so you have to keep the things like, okay, I know that in 1 month I have this, so I have to be ready like this date, in order not to feel like this, like, oh, I'm not ready. So this is planning, I think. And the best example of this, there is a pianist in Italy, his name is Bruno Canino. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he was very famous because he was playing so many concerts with different repertoire every day, that he had an agenda. And then he was writing on each day, planning it before, like, okay, today I have to practice this, that, and that, because he could not remember, it was so much. So he knew that in order to be ready, he had to practice in advance some pieces. So this is something you can do. Just have a schedule now, also on your phone or whatever, and then know that what we usually do, we tend to spend a lot of time on one piece. So we want to do it really well, so we spend maybe 4 or 5 hours on the same piece and go through everything. But if we have a lot of repertoire, we might actually over-practicing this in parts of this piece that we don't need to practice. Then you have to kind of shorten and have goals. Okay, I now devote 1 hour to this because the next 4 hours I have something else to do. And then what do I have to solve? Where are the problems? And this involves a lot of knowledge about your own weak points and what you have to do. So it's also very difficult to give a general suggestion, but I think with experience you can find out what is best for you. What is your own recipe? It's like when you choose what to eat. Our bodies are different. Our pH is different. The way our stomach and intestine, belly work is different. So we all like something more and something less. No, we tend to be attracted to some food, and I think this is the same with practicing. You should know what you need, which is sometimes not what you like. And then do a regime, you know, something like a strategy and a diet, pianistic diet, in order to achieve, you know, to go over what are your weak spots. So it's always programming and planning and being honest with yourself. Oh, I don't even remember. Don't ask me. No, because I had to play like a Marienleben, a cycle of poem, very beautiful cycle by Hindemith. And then I had a lot of chamber music repertoire, and now this solo, and I mean, I can't even remember.
So, what is your general structure for chamber rehearsals, like rehearsing with chamber group?
Well, of course, this depends what is the setting. Sometimes you go to a chamber music festival, and then you meet people with whom you never played. So this is a case where you need to, of course, the first rehearsal is always very important, because the fact is, if you have played a piece that you're playing together a long time, you would have your own very strong ideas. And if the other's ideas are quite different, then might cause a problem. So everybody has to stretch a little bit towards the other to find an agreement on a certain, especially about tempos sometimes. You know, because if your tempo is much slower than the others, then it becomes difficult to be together. But anyway, the strategy is always to find a compromise. So to go towards what are the others' ideas, and then, you know, try to adjust. Of course, it's difficult if you have to go completely against your own ideas, or if the feeling, you know, some people you have more feeling and some others less. And the other case is when you have people with whom you have played a long time. Then there is already a pattern established. You know each other, you play a long time, so it means you have more or less the same taste. Many things are about taste, you know. It can be this way or it can be that other way. It's not either wrong or right. It's just about what you like most. So in that case, it's actually easier. But of course, the only secret is to rehearse a lot. Because then you can, you know, sort of know each other and listen to what the other is, and of course know the score and what he's doing, and then you can relate. And of course, the bigger the group, the more difficult it is, because then there are so many things that happen in the score that the balance is very difficult. And of course, when all of the people have played the piece a lot, then it's much easier, if the ideas are not too different. But I mean, it's all a question of, okay, if you're reading, sight reading first time is different. If you're playing something, preparing for a concert in one day is also different. If you're preparing in 1 week, is different. It depends on the setting, and then you should have like a way of working through the result, knowing how much time you have. Sometimes you have to skip the details because you have no time. It's a little bit like an orchestral, you know, ensemble, and there is a conductor. If he has only 1 hour to fix a symphony, he cannot put in details. He just he has to put in the structure, the tempos and the transitions. But if he has a 1 week, then he can go, okay, this voicing or this solo, and this, let's try, I mean, how to do it better. So it's all about circumstances. So the best is when you have a lot of time to rehearse with people you know and you like. So.
You've mentioned diet and healthy habits and sleep several different times. Would you give us some insight as to what your chosen diet is, if you have one? I know it's a very individual kind of decision that we all make, but maybe give us just some insight as to what you consider good diet, good healthy habits, good sleep habits, those kinds of things.
Yeah, of course, sleeping is the first thing because it's there that our brain is processing all the informations we had during the day. So, of course, it's best if you sleep enough, 7 hours, 8 hours at least. But in our modern world, it's difficult to achieve that. But I mean, keep in mind that especially if you have a big competition or something, it's better to, especially because you will be stressed and you want to have a result, so it's better to get a pattern. And everything is actually about habits. We reinforce our habits by doing things. There was a nice book called The Power of Habit. And this is, we don't realize, but it's so powerful, what we're doing every day, it builds in our system to the point that, you cannot control it anymore, no? For instance, smoking. If you get a habit of smoking, or worse, even drinking, then it can, just kill you. So, I mean, it's healthy habits. I think it's having, as I said, like a schedule. So something that you must do. And in piano playing, usually it's working also on the, like a dancer would do on the bar, working also on your body. So how you use your whole body, how you use your arm, your wrists, and so also exercises, like technical exercises and scales and arpeggios and all these octaves, because this keeps you in like good form. And of course, food. There are many ideas about food, but I think it's, for instance, I'm an Italian, I'm eating a lot of pasta and pizza. But that's me. I wouldn't recommend to other people to do that because maybe their own bodies would, not work with it. Personally, I burn a lot of this and I need this kind of food and it works. So, but as far as food is concerned, you have to find, of course, as I said before, with things that you like to play, maybe are not the ones that you need. Maybe the food that you like to eat sometimes is not what you need. And this is what you have to take care and understand. And of course, when you feel very sleepy after eating something, or really you feel you have to, it means your body is making a big effort to digest this. So you have to kind of see and try to feel what is the best for yourself. And now, I'm also a vegetarian. So since many years, I'm not eating any fish or any meat, but I still eat like milk products or cheese or these things. So, but that's, as I say, it's me. I feel energetic. I don't feel that. So sometimes this theory is that you need meat in order to, to be strong, or maybe physically strong, possibly. But I mean, you don't need to be too physically strong. You don't have to lift the piano. So you just have to. But anyway, you need energy. You need stamina. So I'm fine with that. But I cannot, as I say, I cannot suggest any of these, like, I do this is good for everybody. I don't think it works that way. And also, the way you practice, the way you, the important thing is that you have a meaning to what you're doing, I think. So if you're practicing, you should know, what do I want to achieve? So listen, maybe record yourself, because sometimes it's difficult to know exactly what is wrong. Of course, you have a teacher, probably, so the teacher will tell you. And then judge and understand how to change this. Many times it's just, moving a little bit the wrist or the elbow is immediately done. Because sometimes we're doing things and not accommodating all our system to what the finger is doing. And then there is a problem. Of course, it's also training, because if your fingers are not trained enough, then some things could fail. So Also there you have to be specific and see what is the case that you are examining. But I think healthy schedule is maybe like a good half an hour of just technical exercise in the morning, and then making a schedule on what you have to do according to your repertoire and to what you have to achieve. And then trying to always, when you practice, realize the goal that you had. So of course, if you have like a Rachmaninoff third concerto and you think, okay, in 1 week I will have it memorized and everything will be fine. Only a few people can do this. So you should start maybe, okay, one day I want to have 1 page or 2 pages. That is maybe closer to your goal. And then you realize it. Because the other thing when you have too high a goal is that you will get frustrated. Because you will think, oh, I cannot do it, so I'm a failure. But in fact, you are wanting from yourself something that is impossible for you. There are people who can do that, you know, but very few. So you have to understand what is your current state and then put a step, like one little step above and one little step if you want to improve. But that means that you have to know yourself. And this is the most difficult thing. So philosophers in the past said, you know yourself. This is actually everything that you have to do. And us, as players, it's essential. We have to know, what do I need to achieve that? And if I get a habit of doing things that don't allow me to achieve that, then I will be frustrated. But many times it's the how I get there that is wrong. It's not I'm wrong. So that is the important thing, I think. So to build habits where you have also positive thinking and you are reinforcing your positive thinking by if something, you know, we all make mistakes, you know. So ask yourself, why did I make that mistake? Because there is always a reason. And the reason, sometimes you're too tired, of course it can come. I mean, but sometimes your preparation was not good, or that spot, it's a weak spot in the piece and you overlooked it always because you didn't want to go through, you know, really understanding it, and just you close your eyes and, oh, okay, yeah, oh, yes, it went, but sometimes it doesn't. So, you know, it's a very rational thing, playing the piano, that eventually goes into irrational, because you must have all this preparation before in order to being able to actually being a step above. And so being able to think about the proportions and what you want to express with playing. So it's a complicated matter, but it's building good and healthy habits. I mean, that's the most important thing. So healthy usually, I think, means something that helps you, that doesn't. So if you are always thinking, oh, yes, I did this, and say, oh, I did it again, oh, it's me, I always do that, why do I do that, oh, it's not possible. So this kind of thinking, of course, would not be productive. Productive would be, oh, why do I always do that mistake, you know? And then asking yourself, and maybe the fingering there is not good, or maybe, you know, the coordination with the hands, and then try to discover and trying to fix it. Sometimes changing the fingering can be really work miracles.
What is one piece of advice that you wish someone would have given you, like at the stage of life that we are at, either musically or just life in general?
I think more than a piece of advice, one has to be careful by, I remember in the early times when I was even younger than you, I wanted to practice a piece, and then my teacher at the time said, oh, no, that is too difficult. So this idea, something is too difficult, it's like, so this is what I would wish, and I try not to, I say maybe it's complicated, it's you have to, you know, to delve into it. But when you are put in front of something that you think you cannot achieve, this puts you in your like psychology, in the back of your mind, some limitation. And it's interesting what Chifra said. There is a nice biography he wrote. I don't know whether it's also in English. Is it? Do you remember? It's in French, I know, and Hungarian. And it's like the name is Des canons et des fleurs, so guns and flowers. Why? Because Schumann said a famous phrase that a musician should be like a lot of guns under a bed of flowers. So it means you have to fight hard, you have to work hard, but on top you should not notice this. And Schifra, he of course depicts many things that happened in his life, but one interesting thought is that when he started to play the piano, he wasn't aware of what he was doing. He was just imitating his sister. He was very sick when he was very young, so he was always staying home, and his sister would practice this piano. And he would look and then want to do, and then try to do, and he was like 3 years older. And then at a certain stage he says, yes, and then I saw this case and I was wondering, how is that possible? You know, he was, 3 years old. How is it possible to play a scale, Then his father didn't want to explain to him. He said, no, you're too little or something. And then he was, and he still remembered that the way of empirically coming to a result is much better than doing rationally, as far as a pianist is formed. So some people like Schifra had these incredible, possibilities, pianistical possibilities, because they never thought like rationally. They achieved the result without, knowing, in fact. And this is another thing that would be essential in a young, talented boy, just to let him discover the things and not impose too much. But it's very tricky, of course, because you have to impose something and you have to. So it's difficult to give like a recipe, or I think it's important also there to, even if somebody is negative towards you, sometimes you are at a master class and the teacher is destroying you, like nothing is good and everything is wrong, and so trying to get that as a spring to react and say. Usually it was Russian teachers who would actually crush you to see whether you survived. That was the style at the time. So one has to also develop this and say, yes, I can better that, I can do that. So if some piece of advice is actually difficult to digest, you have to understand whether it's true or not. So if it's true, you have to go through the process of bettering that things, because we all have shortcomings. So, and especially at that age, you have to, just jump the hurdles, not just see a hurdle and see that it's true. So the piece of advice, I think, it's always to look forward to the future, understand the past, and try not to make the same mistakes you did in the past by knowing how to act.
So I have a question. Since you talk about you have a lot of recitals with chamber recitals, and I'm just really curious how, because a lot of time young pianists sometimes they feel sitting in the piano bench as a chamber musician, they sometimes feel is a little less can fully convey their musical idea, or sometimes worry about the balance or the pedal, and I cannot do fully what I want to do because I have another partners. Yeah, so I was wondering from your experience, how would you how would you advise or enlighten the student? Is this the chamber music, musical making, how that can enrich their also solo playing? Yeah.
I think it obviously enriches our solo playing, because the way that a string instrument or a flute or a clarinet or a singing voice, the way they approach a phrase or they approach music is quite different. We have an instrument that is really mechanical. It's a system of levers, and it's just a hammer striking a string. So we cannot have contact with a string. We cannot shape the sound after it has happened. We can do a little bit with the pedal, but not physically on the. Whereas a violinist can start vibrating, can end vibrating, can do a lot of things. Like a flute or a clarinet, a wind instrument, they can really do with respiration. So it's much more physical. So I think when you're playing with these instruments, you see that there are different ways of looking at a phrase. For instance, if you're playing with a wind instrument or a voice, there is a respiration, so the physical breathing. And this is essential. It will give you how you can make a phrase. And usually that's what the composer writes with this bow over the notes. So how many notes make a sentence, let's say. And this usually should be in one breath. It's not given that it's always in one bow, but I mean, the idea is sort of that the breath is like one bow, but it's not mathematical. But anyway, by knowing how a long note, for instance, is working in a voice, how you have to accompany a reed in order for the voice to shine, then will teach you how to play this when you're playing, for instance, a Schubert reed transcription by Liszt. How to make the important things, and it's a question many times of timing. And we pianists are like a little bit donkeys sometimes. You know, we just go straight and we see our own path and we're just walking, and we don't see anything that is around it. And this, making chamber music can better because we then are forced to see the things in another way. I personally was doing a lot of chamber music when I was in school because I loved it. And I think that this helped a lot. And also, one help is that when you play solo, usually you have to be very detailed on everything, you know. But when you play chamber music, sometimes you have to go to the most essential things that are important for the structure, like the bass or like a certain harmony or a certain note. And the first thing that I usually stress, as I did yesterday, is that the piano is not accompanying, especially if you're playing a quintet, like a piano quintet. Those are sometimes little piano concertos. So it's not given that the strings must always be more than the piano. Sometimes the strings are accompanying, sometimes the piano is accompanying. So it's a shared like stage and a shared way of making music that makes you understand that you are not only the number one and everything has to come through you, but you have to give the word, the speaking possibility to all the others. And by this conversation, then I think that the piece can have a structure and can mean something. And that is an example of a democratic society, which means nobody is the real leader, but we're taking the lead one at a time. And I think this is essential to see also chamber music not as a diminishing thing for a pianist, but to see as an enrichment. Because if I play alone, of course, I have to take all the decisions on my own. But if I play with other people, we have to, interact. And I think this is very important also to lower your ego, that sometimes wants to be always the first one and the one having the last word. But we are always wrong, sometimes. There's nobody who is always right. So it's always also nice to know a musician tells you something and sometimes you have a misreading in the score, which is very embarrassing, but it happens. And so, by interacting, I find it very enriching, and I recommend to all the players to, of course, pianists are sometimes, as a string instrument, you will always do like quartet or trio or string trio. You're forced to do it from the beginning. As a pianist, sometimes less, but it's, for me, essential to do it, to enrich yourself and to understand better music.
I have another question about, I've kind of always wondered this, but how do you develop a better listening ear for details? I kind of always wondered this. I don't know if it's just something you develop through experience or something that can be learned.
I think experience is the first thing, because the way you listen changes according to your experience. So sometimes, let's say, okay, you have a piece and you want to, there is some passage that is difficult for you. You cannot master it for some reason. And many times it's the way you think to it. And this is experience what to read in the score, how to transform this in a musical idea and then in a gesture. When your musical idea is not in tune with the music, many times your gesture is not in tune. And then gesture, I mean the way you use all the system in order to make the fingers be at the right spot at the right moment. And I think this is very, very important to have this knowledge. And of course, listening is also a matter of when you're playing, it's difficult to hear everything because you're busy playing. So of course you're listening, but it's not 100%. Of course, if you're sitting there and somebody else is playing, it's very easy to spot because you're just listening. So what is, for me at least, was very beneficial was to record myself and then to listen carefully. And this is a painful process because the first times it's just so bad that you want to disappear, you know. But but anyway, then you sit with the score, and then you oh, this is too loud, and this is not smooth, and these notes are uneven, and this pedal is not good, and you know, by making all these efforts, then but it's like an artisan, you know. You have a block of marble, and then you start scratching off stuff to make finally the figure. So it's a humbling process, but it's something you have to do. I think all the great ones, they have done this because it then you can achieve a better level of playing. Of course, there are some like Michelangelo. You hear he was playing when he was like 17 or 18. It was as perfect as later on. So I mean, in the nuancing of the sound, I mean, in the proportions, in the pedaling. So some people achieve this very at an early stage, but then it's almost a curse because you have to keep this, you know. And then it's like a sportsman, you know, to win once is good, but to win more times means that it is not a piece of luck. You have to know how to do it. So I think it's first thing is to being very critical to yourself and to listening really what you to read the score in a way that you know what is most essential. And this usually is the harmonical structure, what the melody is doing, how to shape a melody, and of course the pedaling and everything goes together with this. So it's maybe recording yourself is one of the first steps. Of course, now they have these fantastic pianos like a Spirio, no, by Steinway, where you can play and then listen the real thing, not just a recording, because of course a recording is always, especially if you don't have good equipment, you cannot know sometimes really the proportions. But with these pianos, I mean, you can really hear what you were doing. This would be fantastic, but of course it cannot happen every day. But I mean, all this means, and also technology can help for that. And then of course, when you practice, also practice slowly and listen with the pedal to all the balance in the voicing, because what is our main task is to make a good voicing, I think. Because we have usually the three levels, no? The melody, the bass, and the accompaniment. This is very basic, but I mean, if this proportion is good, then it sounds well. And of course, having the opportunity of playing in a hall, because then you can listen to the proportions.
So I have a question. So being a soloist, it's a different challenge because you're alone on the stage. So everything what happens, or at the end, if you are content or you are not content, everything depends on you, right? So more or less you are trained, and more or less you are expecting the results, and you know all the way you have to go through this. So you don't have any unexpected things happening. Well, in a majority of the cases, but being in a chamber ensemble or being a chamber musician, sometimes on the stage things happen.
Well, things happen even when you play alone, you know.
Yes, but sometimes things happen that you have never talked about some decisions. There are some musicians that probably they just took a decision on the stage, and then you have to adjust your way, and it's just happening on the stage.
Yeah, but that's actually the fun of it, right?
Yeah,
we cannot decide everything. I think the process of making an interpretation, usually it's to decide the structure and what you want from the piece. And then details, sometimes they can be left to the moment. Of course, as I said before, it depends with whom you're playing. If it's somebody that you know very well, you can sort of smell, something is going to happen. But if it's something really unexpected and also not logical with the music, then this can be a bad surprise, you know, because then you're put off by something really, oh, what happened there, you know, and then you have, of course, to adapt. But sometimes it happens that your friend, they don't have the score. Sometimes they come too soon or too late, and then what do? You try to, you know, sneak in and do something. You know, there is this famous story, you might know it by Kreisler was playing with Rachmaninoff, and there are recordings. And they played Beethoven G major, you know, the 8th sonata, they played the Grieg, they played many pieces. But anyway, they were on stage and he insisted on playing by memory, you know, Kaiser, okay, Carnegie Hall, Carnegie Hall, I play by memory, okay. And then suddenly at a certain spot, he's kind of getting lost. So, you know, he gets closer to Rachmaninoff. Where are we? And Rachmaninoff called me, Carnegie Hall. So, I mean, this can happen, you know. But anyway, you know, life is unexpected. So we cannot protect ourselves from, you know, unexpected things. So they will always happen. Can be a mistake, can be a decision, a sudden decision, but you just have to be ready to react, you know.
Yeah, so we pianists must be ready, not other instrumentalists, right?
Everybody must be ready, of course. Come on.
But I would like to ask if there is any, you can do something before this. You have been trained for this situation. If there is any tools that you can prepare yourself by these unexpected things.
Well, of course, you have to train yourself in the sense that some things can go wrong, and then you can maybe when you rehearse with a group or with a solo instrument, you can just you know, try to play through. And if something, you decide, okay, if anything happens, you make a mistake, we go on. So don't stop. This can be a nice way, because then you will be always very attentive. How can I? So your mind has to work quickly there. Oh, what do I have to jump there just to get him, or will he know that he is wrong? You know, sometimes it can happen. Huh? So you have to train to emergency. It's like when you pilot a plane. The most you do usually is to train about emergencies. So things that will hopefully never happen. So you have to train for it. So for instance, sometimes I have played with an iPad, you know, nowadays there was no page turner or something. And when I'm home, I have to train. What? By doing mistakes in turning pages. So I do a mistake on purpose in turning page, I turn 2 pages. And then I see whether I can come back 1 page while playing what I'm doing. So you train for emergency. And this is the same when you are with another, and of course then things happen and then you have to just jump or whatever, but you have to be very alert, of course. It's our task.
Thank you.
I just have another question, more philosophical in nature, because when you were younger, I remember you had time to pilot planes and to do various things, but life has taken a direction of extreme focus. For the few times that we met over the years, I've seen you very focused. Music occupies now a large amount of time of your day, pretty much. So what do you feel right now as a musician? How do you keep this sort of focus over a long term? Because this is almost a mission at this point.
Well, I must say that I always loved music. So I'm lucky in the fact that I do something I really love passionately. And when it's like that, you don't feel, tired, because you're doing something you like. Of course, you're a little sorry that some things that you also like, you cannot do anymore, like in the same way you were doing as you were a young student. I always wonder when I had so much time when I was younger, you know. Somehow, where is this time now? I cannot understand where it is gone, because it seems that there is no time, but I understand what you say. It's what I like very much is to read, but I'm lucky because by traveling you can read. So this is good. And other things, I like to cycle, for instance, and there is little time. And to walk, sometimes you can do, sometimes not. But I mean, of course, it's as you say, it has taken a direction, but it's a direction I like. So it's not a big burden. I'm a little sorry sometimes that I don't have time enough to be with my family or to do something that I would like, to go to a museum or to see some things when I'm in some town, because I'm busy rehearsing and playing. But well, that's life, you cannot have everything.
I have a little bit of a long question, but I'll try to speak quick. Competitions are becoming very much important for musicians, and they play a big role in us becoming bigger as a musician in the world. And I would like to hear your opinion about competitions and keeping up. If you perform a lot and if you compete a lot, it also is quite draining, I would say. And what would be your advice at this point of probably just managing it all together and keeping you and what identifies you as a musician in all the competitions, so you kind of show yourself and you can speak through the music correctly and not just be ordinary, because there are a lot of competitors on each competitions, and it's pretty easy to just for jury members, I'm sure it's also quite boring to just sit and listen to a lot of people in a row. So just probably to keep on it and also know what can identify you and show you differently to differ you from everyone else performing the same way.
Yeah, I think this is a misconception sometimes, that you feel what you have to do in a competition is either to please some members of the jury. So like, okay, I know this guy is there, I know that guy, so that guy doesn't like this, so I do the way he wants. This is actually used as a system. Sometimes you go to a master class of this person, and then you know how he wants, and then you try to please him. Maybe he's the president of the jury or whatever. This is human, we could say, because you want to be appreciated, and you know that if somebody has a certain taste, you want to go. But you're not doing what you want. And as an artist on stage, what are you called upon doing? I think you're called about saying your word, your view of the world, and saying something about some common knowledge, your point of view. So I think that we are all different, and this difference should be enhanced. Whereas what you think usually when you go to a competition is that you have to be, of course you have to be playing correctly, in the sense that if there are too many mistakes or things, well, of course this will be detrimental. But the misconception is that I think you have to find your own voice. And even if that doesn't please somebody in the jury, it will be your voice. And so what I was, at my times, when I went to competitions, the competitors were fewer. So it was easier. So I'm glad that I was there, in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, because now for you guys it's really tough. I see my students, they go to a competition and there are like 400 applications, of which 320 are discarded, like by just your curricula, what you have done. So it means if you never won a competition, you can never be in a competition. And this is, I find, is very mean, but how can you listen to 400 people? So, it's a kind of a system then that works that way. And then you have to send a video. So maybe these 80 people become 20 by listening to a video. And then the video must be from beginning, from top to the end, without interruption. So I have my poor students, they play, Prelude and Fugue, Etude, Sonata, last page of the sonata, wrong. Okay, again. And then the fourth time you do this, you cannot play anymore. There is no life anymore in your playing. So I find the system is very cruel nowadays. Now, do you really need a competition? In some cases, yes, in order to be appreciated. But there are also so many competitions that, I mean, of course, the Van Cliburn, the Chopin, the Tchaikovsky, this kind of big competitions could give you really a good opportunity. But many others, maybe not. But for you as a player, it's good to be able to play under stress. Of course, it's the most stressful thing to play in a competition. So this is a good training, I think. And that's why I advise you always to go to smaller competitions and try. Because it's all a matter of actually getting the habit of playing under stress. Then about being yourself, I think you have to try to be yourself, not to please other people, because even, I mean, a jury maybe is 9 people, 15 people, 11. How can you please everybody? There will be always somebody who will be pleased and maybe 3, 4 that are not pleased. And what happens, unfortunately, is that usually then at the competition is the average voting that comes through. Because if you do something really with your own, you know, can be very controversial. So somebody will give you 10, somebody will give you 1. And that's another problem. So it's a little bit a difficult topic to analyze. I think it's, you have to do it. You have to go through this kind of suffering because, you know, it's suffering. But it can make you stronger in a way because you have to undergo this. And there it starts. But there, if you are not expressing something that is your own, then it will be a problem because the public will be bored if you just play like so-called correctly. So what is correctly, you know? So I think it's a hard balance. Of course, maybe if you go to a competition, don't do extreme crazy things because you know that, you know, they could be. But also we could look at the past. We saw Pogorelic. He was the greatest talent, but of course he was very strong and strong-minded, and he went out of the competition. But then Marta Argerich stood up and said, "Oh, a scandal." So then his career was due to the fact that he was thrown out. So you see, it's it's difficult to say or to have just one way of looking at things.
I think it's probably time to end this right here. Thank you very much for your time. And just a reminder, we have a masterclass in the Cliburn Hall at TCU at 4 p.m. today. And tomorrow, the recital also in the Cliburn Hall at 7 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.